the hundreds of thousands of dead civilians in Iraq and Afghanistan in the name of civilization building.
That distinction is important. Fear often masquerades as understanding.
We have to remember that when someone says I'm Muslim, when someone says I'm Jewish or I'm Buddhist or I'm Christian, they're not always making a faith statement. It's not a belief statement. It's more of an identity statement.
When people say Islam is the problem, what are they really reacting to?
All religions have good and bad, and partly that has to do with the fact that religion by definition is a man-made institution. And so it's capable of great compassion and it's capable of great violence. Why? Not because of the religion, but because it's made by human beings.
I believe power is uncomfortable to confront, especially when it hides behind scared language.
Particularly when you're in the fields of religion and politics, these are very passionate subjects. People take them very, very seriously. And you know, I've had 2 decades of attacks and death threats, both to me, to my wife, my children. And, you know, I'm not going to pretend that that was easy to deal with and you just kind of brush it off and keep going.
Do you agree that misunderstanding has real consequences, not just intellectual ones?
I say I'm a scholar of religions and they hear priest.
Right.
So, like, no, I'm not here to hear your confession. That's not what I do. I'm a historian. I write about religious figures and religious movements. In academia, you know, you're not allowed to achieve popular success. If you're successful and popular, then by definition, that means you're not a real scholar. A real scholar is someone whose book only sells 12 copies.
A storyteller whose work has shaped how millions of people understand Islam, Christianity, and deeper human need for meaning.
Religion is part of the human experience because it offers a ready-made way of talking about things that are difficult to talk about, to express things that are inexpressible.
Very few books stay in print for 2 decades, unless they keep answering questions people are still asking.
When you study religion, you have no choice but to study art and music and dance and archaeology and anthropology and sociology and literature and history.
That kind of self-awareness only comes with time. You can hear the distance, but also the continuity.
Throw AI into the mix, right? It used to be that, you know, people would just manipulate your words, and then it became people just made up your words, and now it's people just make you say the things that you have not said. And so how do you function in the public world like that?
One of your core ideas is that religion is never just about belief. It's about power, identity, and belonging.
What we often end up doing is creating an imaginary other that we use in order to have a kind of negative pole, a mirror, if you will, so that we can define who we aren't.
Someone feels lost between belief, doubt, and meaning. Where should they start?
It's an irrational mind that you know, science and religion are utterly opposed to each other, that faith and reason don't live in the same world with each other, when in reality, what we know for certain is that whatever belief is and however it functions in the world, it has its source in the proper cognitive functioning of the human brain.
What do even well-intentioned people still misunderstand about Islam?
When we think of religion as the end instead of the means to an end, that's when these conflicts arise. The biggest message that I wanted to express from this book is that Islam is not, it's not unique, it's not extraordinary. It's just like every other religion in the world. And so I think if that message comes across, then I've done my job.
Welcome back. Today on Beyond the Summit, I'm joined by one of the most influential public thinkers on religion, identity, and power in our time. Dr. Reza Aslan is a best-selling author, a scholar of religion, and a storyteller whose work has shaped how millions of people understand Islam, Christianity, and deeper human need for meaning. His book, No God But God, was first published in 2005. And here we are, 20 years later, still reading it, still debating it, and still learning from it. That alone says something powerful. Very few books stay in print for 2 decades unless they keep answering questions people are still asking. Reza has written across history, politics, and faith. He's taught at major universities, hosted global TV series, and sparked conversations that challenge both institutions and assumptions. But beyond the headlines, what I'm most interested in today is the human behind the ideas, the doubts, the evolution, the cost of speaking publicly, and the wisdom that only comes with time. Reza, it's an honor to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be on the program.
I'd like to take this opportunity and talk a little bit about the updated version of your book. A book published 20 years ago, still in print, still selling, still being taught. What do you think people are still searching for when they pick up No God But God today?
Well, Islam is the second largest religion in the world. Most demographers say that it'll probably end up being the largest religion of the world in the next 30 to 50 years. So, it's a religion that has an enormous global footprint. And I think for people who are interested in learning more about where it came from, how it arose, how it evolved, how it has sort of come in so many different versions, and the role that it's played in shaping history and shaping society, particularly in Europe and North America. This is a book that kind of lays all of that out. And it also talks about what's happening currently, right now, where Islam is in the world. And as you noted in the updated edition, I got an opportunity to kind of really revisit this text that came out 20 years ago and then has kind of become the seminal book on Islam, and to look at it again through the lens of the last 20 years, these kind of the tumultuous last two decades.
That really comes true that people aren't just looking for answers. They're looking for context and clarity in a very noisy world that we are living in today. When you look back at the version of yourself who wrote this book in 2005, what feels familiar and what feels like completely different person?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I was, I think, younger, a little more innocent. And if I'm going to be honest with you, probably a little bit more optimistic about the world. And I think, the last decade's been very difficult for a lot of people. Part of the process of updating this book was really going back and re-examining some of those more optimistic takes that I had about the future and seeing if they held. And some of them did, some of them did not. I think that sort of personally, when I think back to where I was 20 years ago when this book first came out, for I think a lot of people in my situation, we were kind of stuck in a very reactionary place. We were reacting to the way in which Islam and our culture and our identities were being attacked. And I think a lot of us, were trying um, to sort of, clap back and to um, dispel some of the misinformation and some of the propaganda that was out there. And I think now, 20 years later, even though Islam is still very much a part of the global conversation, it's not really on the front pages the way that it was back then. And so I think, I could remove a little bit of the defensiveness, I suppose, and be a little bit more neutral in the way that some of the thoughts and the ideas in the book were being presented. It's not so much trying to respond to current events. It's about reshaping the book in such a way so that it has another 20 years of life.
I love that. That kind of self awareness only comes with time. You can hear the distance, but also the continuity. In the new 20th anniversary edition, what does a reader gain now that simply wasn't possible back then?
Well, it's funny. I was just talking to somebody about this recently. 20 years ago, I was talking about the way in which the internet has completely transformed Islam and the way authority works in Islam. And that was really before we were talking about social media as the force that it is now. And so a lot of the updated material is about the way in which the new media landscape is transforming Islam, creating what I call a cyber ummah, a virtual community of Muslims online. And cyber muftis, TikTok influencers who have more say over the way that Islam is understood by millions of people than sort of the traditional institutional authorities that we had 20 years ago. And that's a pretty profound shift that's taken place.
So that perspective is powerful, especially because history didn't move in a straight line and the way that many people expected. I really like that. Was there anything in the original book that time forced you to rethink? You mentioned some couple of things, refine or even challenging yourself.
Yeah. The book came out in 2005, so 4 years removed from 9/11. So I think uh, a lot of the book, and this is, I think what the publisher really wanted, and also what was necessary at the time, a lot of the book was written in direct response to the kind of muscular forms of Islamic transnational and nationalist terror movements. And it's not to say that those movements don't exist anymore or that they're not still, very much in play. It's just that I think the most people have kind of put some of those things into the background. So the book, I think the updated edition is less in conversation with those groups like Al Qaeda and ISIS than it was 20 years ago. And it's much more, I think, well, it's a book now that's much more geared towards posterity. It's not as historically or contextually grounded as it was 20 years ago.
I love that. So, Reza, you have lived through post 9/11 fear, the Arab Spring, social media, and deep polarization. How those realities change how this book lands today?
That's a good question, and I think that's part of the process of this new updated edition is to strip it of some of those historical contingencies and to really make it much more universal, much more grounded in historical trends rather than kind of contemporary events. And I think as a result, it's more relevant today even than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I cannot agree more. It feels like the book aged not because the word healed, but because the questions became more urgent.
Yeah, it became more urgent and became, I think, deeper and more fundamental, less reactionary and more kind of, about who we are as human beings and how we understand the role that religion plays in the public world.
Right. One of your core ideas is that religion is never just about belief, it's about power, identity, and belonging. Why do we resist that truth so strongly?
Well, I think non-religious people have a very simplistic view about religion and religious people, whether they are critical of it or not. I think they just sort of think that religious people are sort of like robots, they just like they look at their scripture, the scripture tells them what to do and they go out and do it. And so therefore if the scripture has anything untowards or negative in it, then therefore the whole thing is ruined. As Bill Maher once said to me during one of his shows, like, if a pool has one little piece of poop in it, then the entire water needs to be drained. And that's how he understands religion, that even one, bad thing in there means the whole religion is useless and should be gotten rid of. But that's of course not the way that we think, right? That all religions have good and bad, and partly that has to do with the fact that religion by definition is a man-made institution, and so it's capable of great compassion and it's capable of great violence. Why? Not because of the religion, but because it's made by human beings, and so therefore humans are capable of great compassion and great violence, and so it's going to reflect the totality of the human experience. So I think that's probably, a very important thing to understand. But yeah, you're right. As I say often, I think we have to remember that when someone says I'm Muslim, when someone says I'm Jewish or I'm Buddhist or I'm Christian, they're not always making a faith statement. It's not a belief statement. It's more of an identity statement. It's more about who they are, how they understand themselves in an indeterminate world than about the things that they believe. And the example that I give about this all the time is that in the United States, 70% of Americans call themselves Christian, which is ridiculous. There's no way that 70% of Americans, 7 out of 10 Americans go to church on a regular basis, or that like 77 out of 10 Americans read the Bible normally, or that 7 out of 10 Americans could really tell you much about Jesus at all, except that he was born in a manger, because that's Christmas, and died on a cross, because that's Easter. When that 7 out of 10 says, I am Christian, they're not always making a belief statement. They're not telling you what they believe, they're telling you who they are, how they
Right.
understand themselves. And religion is part of that understanding.
That makes sense. Personally, I believe power is uncomfortable to confront, especially when it hides behind scared language.
Hmm. Hmm.
When people say Islam is the problem, what are they really reacting to?
I think that often that statement, it's not about Islam at all. It's about themselves. It's, look, we as human beings have always had a very difficult time identifying ourselves, saying with much confidence who we are. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's much easier to say who you aren't. And so what we often end up doing is creating an imaginary other that we use in order to have a kind of negative pole, a mirror, if you will, so that we can define who we aren't. And so we take all of the negative qualities that we want to get rid of ourselves, and then we hoist them on this other, the Irish, the Italians, Catholics, Jews, Islam, right? Mexicans, immigrants, And when we do that, we don't really understand what that other is. It's just something that we've made up. It's a wholly new creation that we've done just so that we could help figure out who we ourselves are. But it doesn't really give us much of an idea of what those other different groups are, who they are, how they function, how they view themselves, etc. So I think this is just a part of the human condition, if you will.
So that distinction is important. Fear often masquerades as understanding. So, from your research and teaching, what do even well intentioned people still misunderstand about Islam?
That it's different. Honestly, that's it. Like, that it's not like other religions, that unlike every other religion in the history of the world, Islam is unchanging, it's monolithic, it's static, it is not affected by history and culture and language and societies. And by the way, you even hear this from Muslims, well-meaning Muslims, right? That, oh, no, there's other religions and then there's Islam, and Islam is different, And the biggest message that I wanted to express from this book is that Islam is not different. It's not unique. It's not extraordinary. It's just like every other religion in the world. And so I think if that message comes across, then I've done my job.
Do you agree that that misunderstanding has real consequences, not just intellectual ones?
Unquestionably. I mean, we go back to 20 years ago, and the war against terror, which was very clearly and explicitly defined as a religious contest, between the enlightened Christian world and the backward Muslim world. And that led to horror of that decade, the hundreds of thousands of dead civilians in Iraq and Afghanistan in the name of civilization building, right? In the name of, well, back then we called it democracy promotion, but it's the same idea that like these are backward civilizations. They require the enlightenment of the West, even if that enlightenment comes at the end of a gun. We're still dealing with the consequences of those terrible decisions that were, in many ways, launched out of a place of total ignorance about Islam as both a faith and a culture.
And the sad truth about what you mentioned is the innocent people's lives. That's the saddest part, when I think about it.
Yeah, and then we'll never know what the number is, I mean, we know it's in the hundreds of thousands, but we'll never know.
Right. Reza, you have written about Jesus, Muhammad, God, martyrs. What do these figures reveal about human nature more than religion itself?
That we are fundamentally geared towards a longing for transcendence, right? That our our brains are properly functioning when we are yearning for that which is beyond the material realm, that this is a cognitive impulse, right? I think that's what people misunderstand. They think that belief is the product of, well, it depends on who you listen to, but some people think that it's a product of a diseased mind, that it's an irrational mind, that science and religion are utterly opposed to each other, that faith and reason don't live in the same world with each other, when in reality what we know for certain is that whatever belief is and however it functions in the world, it has its source in the proper cognitive functioning of the human brain, right? That's what the brain is designed to do. Why? We don't know. We're not sure about that. I mean, there's a lot of different theories and conversations, and we don't need to get into that. But what is not under debate is that this is what our brains do. And so I think that's a profound idea to understand. You can come up with your own reasons for why that is, but to recognize that belief isn't a thing that's out there that you tap into. It's a thing that exists in here, and that it is part of how our brain functions.
That's a beautiful, beautiful way of framing it. Religion as a mirror rather than a verdict. I
Yeah,
love
that's
that.
nicely put. Yeah.
So, do you think modern societies still need religion, or do they just need meaning?
I don't think that there's a difference between religion and meaning. Religion is the language that we use. It's a ready-made language made up of symbols and metaphors that a community, a like-minded community, can adopt in order to communicate with each other and with themselves this ineffable experience that we're talking about, right? So it's not so much that, do we need religion is kind of the wrong way of thinking about it. Religion is part of the human experience because it offers a ready-made way of talking about things that are difficult to talk about, to express things that are inexpressible. But I think the problem comes when we confuse the metaphor for the thing itself, right? When we think of religion as the end instead of the means to an end, that's when these conflicts arise.
I love that. So simple but powerful. You became widely known through moments of controversy.
Yeah.
What did public scrutiny teach you that private scholarship never could?
It's a really good question. I guess both how to communicate in the public realm and how to be wary of the public realm. In scholarship, we have this kind of very private language that we speak to each other, and everything is very hyper specialized. But that's not how the public talks. And so you have to be very careful about the words that you use, the language that you use, the ways in which it can be manipulated by other people. And, I don't know if I could say that I actually learned that lesson, but it's a lesson that I've tried to learn at least.
That's something people rarely talk about, the emotional education that comes with visibility.
It took me a very, very long time to recognize that. And maybe even, I may have recognized it too late, but you're absolutely right. It is quite an education.
Was there ever a moment where the cost of speaking publicly made you question whether it was worth it?
Many, many, many times, probably most famously when I called President Trump and lost my job and, had to go into security hiding and all of that stuff. This was in June of 2017. Was a trailblazer and paid the price for it back then. I don't regret my sort of public opinion of the man, but I do regret, all the jobs that were lost as a result of it, for sure.
Yeah, and thousands, if not millions of people who could use the wisdom that you could actually bring them. But anyway, we have to learn a lesson in different ways.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
That
Absolutely.
that vulnerability is important. People often forget there is a human behind the ideas.
That's right.
How
Right.
do you protect your inner life when your work constantly invites reaction?
Honestly, I don't know. Like for me, I think I really needed to, a couple of years ago, I just kind of stepped away from the public stage a lot to really focus on family and the things that truly do matter. Particularly when you're in the fields of religion and politics, these are very passionate subjects. People take them very, very seriously. And, I've had 2 decades of attacks and death threats, both to me and to my wife, my children. And, I'm not going to pretend that that was easy to deal with and you just kind of brush it off and keep going. I tried that, but it's very, very difficult to do. And ultimately, I couldn't do it. Ultimately, I did have to just finally retire from public life, if you will. I hate to say this, but I'd say it's even worse nowadays than it was when I left.
Yeah.
Now throw AI into the mix, right? It used to be that, people would just manipulate your words, and then it became people just made up your words. And now it's people just make you say the things that you have not said. And so how do
Now
you
it's
function in the public world like that?
much worse. Yeah, I agree. So that discipline feels essential, especially in a culture that rewards outrage.
That's right. The
Yeah.
culture that rewards outrage. You're absolutely right.
Do you think controversy ultimately helps understanding or distorts it?
I think you can do both. The one thing that I think is useful about controversy, and I'm not going to pretend that I have not benefited from it, is that it does allow you to gain attention. And it's very hard to get attention nowadays. And certainly sustained attention is extraordinarily difficult, right? The most earth-shattering event now lasts about 48 hours, before. I mean, if aliens suddenly showed up in Times Square, it would be a story for about a week, and then we would move on to, the other nonsense concerns. And controversy does help in that regard. And I won't lie, I did use it to my advantage when I could. But in the end, as we mentioned, it's a losing enterprise that it just then becomes more noise very, very quickly.
It is a complicated trade off, and you've lived both sides of it. I know.
Yes. Yes, I have. Yeah, I've experienced the good and the bad. Yeah.
What's something critics have said about you that forced genuine self reflection?
I I don't know if I would say self-reflection, but I think it's, look at, again, in my field, you're going to get a lot of criticisms. Um, that you're an apologist, that you're, whatever, well, all kinds of things. And none of it really bothers me. But the one that always did bother me was when my scholarship would get denied or belittled, because I achieved popular success. Right. In academia, you're not allowed to achieve popular success. If you're successful and popular, then by definition, that means you're not a real scholar. Right. A real scholar is someone whose book only sells 12 copies. That's a real scholar. But if your book sells 1 million copies, well, then you're not a real scholar then. And as absurd as that is, anyone who has gone through academia knows how much pain and suffering is involved in getting to the place where you finally have your PhD and you're finally there. And so every time, my scholarship would get kind of dismissed or belittled, I would get a little that's the thing that would always set me off because it was so much work, so much pain, so much suffering, so much cost, you
It is.
know, to get to the place where I'd gotten, and to have it all dismissed because a book became a bestseller is difficult sometimes. But
Unbelievable. Oh
yeah,
my God. Yeah.
there's a great line. I think it's Henry Kissinger, I believe, is the one who said it. The line is, the politics of academia are so petty because the stakes are so low. And that's true.
Very true. Yeah. So, what is a failure most people don't associate with your success?
Failure, that's a good one. I think, wow, failure that people don't associate with my success. I guess maybe it probably goes back to what we were saying about those viral moments, for better or for worse. I've been involved in a handful of pretty viral moments in my life. Moments that still stick around. I have kids who every once in a while one of these moments of mine kind of pops up again, and briefly goes viral for a day, and my kids bring it up to me like, oh, look what you're on, look at this, you're on Instagram, or look what happened. And I think, you know for me, I don't necessarily think of those moments as moments of success, right? I mean, yes, I'm not going to lie that I certainly have benefited from those moments, but the cost of those moments have always also been pretty profound in this kind of polarized society that we live in. And so I think that's probably the best answer that I can give is it's those 3 or 4 viral moments that probably from the outside seem like, wow, it's great. So, anybody would kill for this kind of viral publicity, and it comes with a pretty massive cost.
Right. Failure tends to hide behind polished narratives. Thank you for naming that. No,
Yeah.
I understand that. Was there a book, project, or phase that didn't land the way you hoped?
Yes, absolutely. Certainly the follow-up to No God But God, the follow-up to No God But God, this was written, at the height of the Iraq War and the clash of civilizations, us versus them, good versus evil, Islam versus Christianity. And I wrote a follow-up that was called How to Win a Cosmic War, that was about religion and violence and the cost of this kind of religious rhetoric in politics, and particularly in war. And it just didn't land the way that I was hoping for it to land. Now, it did have a second life, thank God. It was kind of reworked and rewritten in a paperback form that was retitled Beyond Fundamentalism. And that book is still, it's used in a number of university courses that deal with kind of the topics of religion and violence, sacred violence, things like that. But at the time, what I really was hoping for was a book that would become a part of the national conversation around this problematic ways in which religion was infiltrating um, the military, our our political rhetoric. When you start talking about a global war on terror as a crusade against evildoers, this is not a way to bring about peace and prosperity. On the contrary.
I believe that kind of experience reshapes how anyone approaches the next chapter. How did failure change the way you write or teach?
Well, staying on this theme, actually, it's a pretty good one, which is that book, which really tried to kind of respond specifically to current events, didn't work because those current events passed me by. And so when it came time to sit down and write the next book, I really wanted to kind of go back to what made No God But God a success, which is to talk about the historical origins of a religious tradition. And that became my third book, Zealot, which became this kind of global phenomenon about the historical Jesus. So I think, were it not for the failure of Cosmic War, I'm not sure if I would have been able to have the success that Zealot then became.
That restraint often produces deeper work. In your case, Zealot is the result of that. Once I was watching one of your interviews, I really liked one of your lines. You were mentioning if people are interested in humanity, so you sometimes tell your students, I tell them to choose religion. Can you talk a little bit about that? I love that line.
Yeah, it's funny because First of all, I think most people don't even think of religion as an academic discipline, right? I can't tell you how many times I'll be on a plane and someone asks me what I do, and I say I'm a scholar of religions, and they hear priest.
Right.
So, like, no, I'm not here to hear your confession. That's not what I do. I'm a historian. I write about religious figures and religious movements. But, as someone who is deeply interested in the humanities, literature and the arts and music and anthropology and sociology and archaeology and all of those things, what I love about religion is the way in which it encompasses so many of these other disciplines. That when you study religion, you have no choice but to study art and music and dance and archaeology and anthropology and sociology and literature and history. All of these things are the ways in which religion as a phenomenon expresses itself in the world. And so, yeah, I make this claim all the time. Like, if you love the humanities and you can't choose religion because it'll let you do all of them.
I love your perspective. What did younger Reza underestimate about time, patience, or uncertainty?
It's the scale of it. I mean,
Mm.
I think to myself, I'm now 53, and I think when I was even in my 20s, even in my 30s, I just assume like that's when you die, right? Like that's when life is over, right? And now that I'm in my 50s, it doesn't feel like 50s at all. I pretty much feel the same way that I felt when I was in my 30s. So I think the older you get, the more your understanding of the scale of time shifts, right? I mean, when I was 18, I had a friend who was 24 and I thought he was a grown up. I think anyone who's 24 would laugh at that statement.
That's wisdom earned the slow way.
In a
This
very
is
slow way.
nice. Yeah. You have worked across books, television, classrooms, digital platforms. Which medium tells the truth best and which distorts it the most?
You know, it's funny. I'm not concerned about the platform. My medium is storytelling. And to me, religion is storytelling, politics is storytelling, race is storytelling, history is just storytelling, memory is just storytelling. Story is at the heart of everything that we do as human beings. And I actually am kind of unconcerned with the platform in which I share the story, whether it's the written word or whether it's TV or film or podcasts or the arts. These to me are just vehicles for the expression of story. And so I don't see it as one of them being more effective than the other or one more prone to, the conveyance of truth than the others. Truth is truth, story is story, and the platform in which it is shared, I'm agnostic about.
So, talking about storytelling reminds me the fact that you have always wanted to be a writer, not an
Always.
astronaut who turned to be a writer. And it is funny, because uh, especially immigrants, Persian families, just having a writer at home, it's kind of
Yes.
surprised. What happened?
Well, you know, I've told this story before, and I just think it's hilarious. As an immigrant and child of immigrants, when I told my parents that I wanted to write, I don't think they understood what that meant, right? Um, I kind of joked that my mom basically was like, "Well, who's stopping you from writing? You go be a doctor and then you write." And I don't think it made sense that I meant I wanted to write it for a living. That didn't make sense. And so for me, a big part of the pursuit of academia, besides the fact that I enjoyed it and I was good at it, was to kind of address that question of, yeah, but what are you going to do for a living? You can't write for a living. And so that's why, I pursued academia. And I don't know, I mean, it never occurred to me, honestly, at that time that my academic life and my writing life would just kind of merge together. I thought they would be two separate, independent lives that I would pursue. And so I'm lucky in the sense that they've kind of come together in that way.
Right.
But, I think If there are any children of immigrants out there, they know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You mentioned about cyber Ummah, about TikToks, about different social media platforms. Has social media made religion more accessible or more shallow?
Both, I think. You know, we are wringing our hands a lot about, what social media is doing to religion. I understand that. But social media is just yet another movement in the evolution of human beings and how we communicate with each other. I mean, there was just as much hand wringing when the printing press was invented. There was just as much hand wringing when the internet was invented. And a lot of the things that people say about social media has been said many, many times before. It just is what it is. I will say what is, I think, interesting about social media is that it has created a whole new set of authority figures, right, in
Right.
religion. And I think people are gravitating towards smaller and smaller virtual communities that really do connect with them and make them feel like they belong in a way that we haven't seen in human history before. I've said this before, but it is important to note that for the entirety of human history, the definition of community meant the people who were around you, right? Community was a geographically defined word until about 10 years ago, right? Until really a little more than a decade ago, when suddenly community was no longer geographically bound. And so you may have more in common with someone who lives thousands of miles away from you, who speaks a different language than you, who has a different skin color, a different religion, different culture than you, because you like the same movies or you like the same music and you see the world the same way. And in a way that you would never have in the entirety of human history had the opportunity to do so, you now have a way not just to communicate with that individual, but to form a truly meaningful, lasting sense of community with that individual. And that is having and will continue to have profound influence on the shape of human history.
I love that. Reza, what worries you most about how younger generations encounter belief today?
Belief has always been a reactionary phenomenon, right? So it's when we look at human history and the sort of moments of surging of belief, it's always been in reaction to what's going on in the world around us. And let's not mince words. The world is in danger.
Right.
Democracy is dying everywhere. Planet is on fire. Um, you know, if you're a young person, it's hard to be optimistic about where things are going. And oftentimes, when facing those kinds of existential threats, our reaction takes religious forms. And so I do worry that Gen Z, especially, will either react by completely stripping themselves of faith and belief altogether, which I think, as I said earlier, is denying a vital part of the human condition, or will adopt extreme forms of belief as a way of pushing back against a tide of history that they feel is not in their control.
Believe that concern comes from care, not fear. And on the flip side, what gives you hope?
You know, w- my most hopeful moments are those moments where I'm looking backwards, not forwards. So I think when we look forward, as I said, it's hard to be hopeful. It's hard to look at the shape of human history right now, the trajectory of human history right now, moving forward, and have any hope, right? But if you change your gaze and look backwards at the history that we've left behind, what you see are these profound crests and troughs, right? These moments of ups and downs, and you recognize that we may be in a downward slope right now, a real trough right now, but there's no reason to think that this is the end of the game for us, right? Look backwards and you'll see all of human history is this ups and downs, ups and downs. Um, and so, it gives me hope to think that, we will eventually be on the crest again.
I believe hope grounded in reality always lands stronger.
Yeah, no question
On
about
this show, we explore health, wealth, and freedom. Let me ask you personally, what does health mean to you physically, mentally, and spiritually?
it. Good question. Um, Sometimes a metaphor that I use is I think of like if you think of the universe as a fast flowing river, and we've all had this experience before. There are moments where you feel like you are struggling against that current, that you're moving up current, or you're struggling and standing perfectly still sometimes. And then there are moments where you just cease struggling and you just allow the current to take you. And it's those moments that I feel the healthiest because I feel as though I'm just letting things happen, right? I'm going with the flow, if you will. um, and I think for a lot of people who have had that experience, whether they're conscious of it or not, they will tell you that everything falls into place, you know, health and happiness and work and family and love life and all of those things that when you're at one with the universe, when you're allowing the current to just take you and not fighting it, all those other things come into play in a way that they don't when you're struggling against it, when you're fighting back, when you're pushing against the current.
I really love that the way you framed it. Where do you put the importance of physical health that can be interpreted as spiritual or mental health that you
Oh,
mentioned?
absolutely. No, I am definitely a body mind person. I don't see the distinction between body mind. I see them as absolutely integrated with each other. And
I
so
love it.
if your body isn't in a good place physically, it's very hard to get the mind there. And I've been there. I've had these moments. I think about even just like the post COVID experience, right? That, in many ways, COVID was a great opportunity for my family to really bond and become close to each other because we were all sort of enclosed. But at the same time, it wasn't until like 2022 that I noticed, right, that wow, all of this being enclosed has had a toll on my body, and eventually my mind kind of also plunged, of darkness and depression and confusion. And so it really was a conscious effort to build my body back up to be healthy again that shifted what was going on for me consciously.
So I love it because sometimes you ask a question, you're expecting the answer. That was exactly the answer I was expecting.
Good.
So mind and body integration.
Mind and body integration.
Exactly.
That's right.
Wonderful. Thank you. You nailed it. So what does wealth truly give and what can it never give?
Mm. You know, it, it's a cliche, but it can't give you happiness. But what it does give you is ease of mind. And I grew up very, very poor, like food stamps poor, like government cheese poor. And so I know the stress that that causes in a household. And it's difficult. It's really, really difficult to get past it when, most basic needs are front and center. And I've also had, experiences in which I haven't had to worry about those kinds of things and was able to allow my mind to kind of think about other things, higher things, if you will. And so I don't want to discount, the importance that actual wealth plays in the health of a system, but it's not what you think it is, right? It's different. It's when you are not being forced to confront your immediate needs, it does open you up to some higher levels of spiritual thinking. You can put your concerns elsewhere. And I
Absolutely.
think that's what wealth fundamentally allows for.
Thank you so much for sharing your own definition of wealth. It's adorable. What does freedom look like at this stage of your life?
Hmm. I think very personally for me, it looks like being able to um, prioritize family, right? That I can go to, that I make every breakfast, I pack every lunch, I make dinner, I go to every, ball game, every school event, that I have the freedom to be able to focus my full attention on the needs of my family. That's a dream that I've always had, and it's something that I worked very hard to achieve.
Those definitions clearly evolve with lived experience. Has your relationship with certainty changed over time?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's supposed to, right? I mean, when you're young, you're certain about everything. And then hopefully, eventually, you grow older and wiser and more mature, and you realize that you're not certain about anything. And so my certainty now has become very, very narrowed to my role in my family. That's my only certainty anymore. And everything else is kind of up for grabs.
It is interesting that comfort with ambiguity,
Yeah,
feels like real maturity.
that's right. That's right. I think it is the absolute signal of maturity. And it's not about years. I mean, I know a lot of older people who don't have that, and the younger people who do.
Right. So, what do you know now that you wish you had trusted earlier?
That the world's attention lasts about 24 hours, and that it doesn't require constant reaction and response, right? That I think, especially for people who are addicted to the news, as I used to be, and I'm not anymore, there's this idea that like everything that happens requires you to respond to it, requires an opinion from you, requires you to react to it. And that's just not the case. As I was saying before, even the most earth-shattering events are wiped from, our memory and our experience in less time than you can possibly imagine. And so sometimes it's best to just let things wash over you. It's fine. Just let it go.
That insight alone is worth the conversation.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
It took a long time to come to that realization. I
Since,
promise you that.
yeah, I
Lot of
love it.
lot of mistakes before I got there.
Yeah, I see that. Um, this is another reminder that this is 20th anniversary of your book. When people read No God But God 20 years from now, what do you hope still resonate?
I love that. An understanding of what religion is and is not. That religion isn't faith. That religion isn't belief. That religion is the language we use to express faith and belief. And so it's not even so much about what they get about Islam, it's about what they get about religion in general. That's what I really hope lasts.
That's a powerful way to think about legacy. Not permanence, but relevance. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate that.
What conversations about religion and humanity are we still avoiding?
I think we are still avoiding the identity conversation, right? Because if you just label religion belief, then it's easy to ignore. Oh, well, that's just things you believe, and beliefs don't have any relevance, when it comes to reason or science or whatever. Or it's easy to create primacy, right? That a person's beliefs are all that matters. If you think of religion as just a mode of knowing, right? Religion is a filter through which we experience the world. It's not the only filter, but it's a major filter. It's a way of knowing, it's a way of understanding, and it's equally valid as any other mode of knowing, mode of understanding. Then I think that is something that really will transform the way that you see not just religion, but the world itself.
Beautiful. Do you agree that avoidance often signals where growth is needed most?
It does for me. That's for sure. It always takes me a while to realize that I'm avoiding something, whether it's something in the world or really something in here. And it's usually that realization that becomes the first moment in which I realize, okay, this is a thing that requires attention.
Reza, I'd love to know what responsibility do thinkers like you carry in polarized times?
Well, I would say I think the responsibility is primarily one that is about avoiding that polarization by using the language necessary to speak to the middle. I want to be clear. I'm not one of these people who's constantly like, oh, we have to reach across the aisle to the other side, right? Sometimes the other side is ridiculous and illogical and irrational and bigoted. You know, the other side sometimes denies my dignity as a human being. What am I reaching out for? That is a, what's to reach out to? It's not about reaching out to the other side. It's about recognizing that the vast majority of your audience is neither this side or that side, but just sort of in this muddled middle. And so focus on the middle.
Beautiful. Let's make it a little bit more practical. If someone feels lost between belief, doubt, and meaning, where should they start?
With themselves. So I think this is the other thing is that sometimes we feel like, oh, what religion does is it tells you what to believe or it tells you how to feel. And it doesn't. What religion does is it helps you give a language to the things that you already feel and the things that you already believe. That those are sort of internalized. And so don't be afraid to look within, to look inside for the answers. Obviously, look, you can look to other people, other leaders, thought leaders, spiritual leaders to help give words and shape to your feelings, right? You need to access those feelings. You need to access those inner voices because more often than not, they're right.
Right. So that answer feels deeply grounding. Reza, if you could leave the audience with one idea, not a belief, not an argument, but a way of seeing the world that could make them more thoughtful, more compassionate, and more free, what would it be?
I think it would be a recognition that the barriers that often divide us into different religions, different nationalities, different races, different cultures, different languages are false. They're fabricated, right? That they're just these sort of exterior shells that, while important in their distinction, are not vital to what it means, right, to be human, and that our connection goes so much deeper than that. It's why, as I was saying earlier, that like for me, it's all about storytelling because storytelling has the power to break through those walls of separation because it's fundamentally hitting us at the most human level. And it doesn't matter, what color your skin is or what God you pray to when the story is about the human condition. And so that's where I focus my efforts is about that getting to the human condition.
That's so powerful. And finally, is there anything that you rarely talk about or you've wanted to talk about for a long time? This is the time.
Wow, I don't because I talk so much and so often it's hard to think of something that I don't get to talk about. Certainly not, I think that a lot of people would be interested in, except to say that I'm a diehard uh, football fan, and more specifically, a Raiders fan. I know what suffering feels like. I know what existential angst feels like as a Raiders fan, and man, is it hard.
Reza, thank you. This has been a thoughtful, generous conversation. And congratulations again on 20 years of No God But God.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me, Amir.